My mother-in-law Diane has always had a flair for dramatics, sweet on the surface, steely underneath. At her birthday dinner, she looked radiant under the golden pendant lights, her pearls gleaming, her tone sugar-laced as she played the part of the gracious host. But I've learned to listen to the silences between her words, the pause that comes before the compliment, the quick flicker of her eyes before a passive-aggressive jab. That night, I walked into the kitchen to help carry out the drinks. I'd just gotten back from a week-long photography assignment in the Rockies, my muscles still sore from the cold, my eyes gritty from a red-eye flight. I should have stayed home. But Haley, my wife, Diane's daughter, had begged me to come. Just dinner, just a few hours. I saw it happen out of the corner of my eye. Diane didn't know I was already there, standing behind the swinging door to the pantry. She leaned over 2 glasses of sangria sitting apart from the rest and poured something from a small glass vial into one of them. A clear liquid, quick, controlled, practiced. When she noticed me a second later, she startled, then quickly pasted on a smile. "Oh, Julian, I made this one just for you. Special cocktail for my favorite son-in-law," she said. Her voice was sweet, but I could hear the tightness under it. I stepped forward and smiled back. "Thanks, Diane, that's really thoughtful." I picked up both glasses. She didn't stop me. In the dining room, Gerald, her husband, was already seated, tapping away on his phone, indifferent to the moment. "Sangria, sir," I offered, placing the tampered glass in front of him. He grunted. A thanks, took a sip, and went back to scrolling. I sat down, picked up my water instead. 45 minutes later, Gerald turned a shade paler than the tablecloth. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He excused himself, then stumbled toward the bathroom. We heard him retching through the walls. Diane's face lost its color. Across the table, our eyes met. I held her gaze, calm, silent. She knew. And now, so did I. I'm a photographer. That's the line I always start with. Not influencer, not content. Creator. A real camera-in-hand, mud-on-my-boots photographer. My name's Julian Mercer. I'm 32, based in Asheville. And for the last decade, I've lived off what I capture through my lens. Weddings, wildlife, travel spreads for magazines that still print on actual paper. I've chased lightning in Arizona, hiked glaciers in Alaska, and covered protests from behind tear-gassed streets. But to my in-laws, I may as well be unemployed. Gerald, my father-in-law, is a numbers man. Investment banking. Suits that cost more than my first camera rig. He talks in market forecasts and equity positions. The kind of guy who values respect, but only if it comes with a W-2. And Diane, well, Diane prefers a velvet knife. Her comments are always layered under compliments, backhanded and sweetly poisonous. "How's the little photography hobby?" Gerald would ask, swirling wine in a glass worth more than my rent. "Must be hard not having health benefits." "Honey, Julian, took some lovely photos of a forest last week," Diane would chime in. "So creative. When are you going to exhibit in a real gallery?" They never missed a beat. Every family dinner felt like a slow paper cut. They'd seat me at the far end of the table, talk across me about trust funds and real estate. Once, Diane introduced me to her friend as Haley's husband, the artist, like it was a polite way of saying burden. I brought them copies of my work when I was published in National Geographic. They barely glanced at them. Haley tried. She always tried. She'd defend me with soft words and hand squeezes under the table, her loyalty never wavering. But I saw the sadness in her eyes when her mother cut me down, the way she apologized without saying anything. Still, I stayed silent. I thought if I kept showing up, kept succeeding, they'd eventually see me for who I was. Not the job title they resented, but the man who loved their daughter, who showed up every single time. But acceptance never came. Only disdain, dressed up in fine linen and fake smiles. I met Haley at an art exhibition in Asheville 6 years ago. She stood in front of one of my framed shots, a fox perched on the ruins of an old train station, morning mist curling around it like breath, and just stared. I watched her from across, the room pretending to sip wine I couldn't afford. When she finally turned around, her first words were, "It looks lonely, but free." That was it. We talked for hours. She was finishing her master's in environmental science, passionate about protecting the very landscapes I photographed. Where I saw images, she saw ecosystems. We spoke the same language in different dialects. A week later, we were hiking in Pisgah Forest. A month after that, we were inseparable. Loving Haley was easy. Her family, not so much. Her father, Gerald, made it clear from the first handshake that I was a disappointment wrapped in denim. He'd ask where I saw myself in 5 years, then answer for me. "Still chasing butterflies, huh?" He'd talk about Thomas, the orthopedic surgeon Haley briefly dated in college, like a missed IPO. Diane played the long game. She'd introduce me at gatherings as Haley's creative friend, even after we were engaged. At one family wedding, they took portraits with everyone except me. When I asked if I should join, Diane smiled and said, "This is just for the immediate family." I laughed it off, pretended it didn't bother me, but it chipped away. The worst part wasn't the overt insults. It was the dismissals. The way they'd turn conversations when I spoke. The way Diane would whisper to Haley, "He's sweet, but don't you think it's time for something more stable?" Gerald once offered to get me an entry-level desk job at one of his firms. Said I could start fresh. I never told Haley everything. What would be the point? She knew they didn't approve. She tried to soften the blows, make excuses for them. "They just don't understand your world," she'd say. "They're old-fashioned." But deep down, I knew it wasn't about understanding. It was about control. And they never stopped trying to remind me I didn't belong in their story. I'd just gotten back from Montana that morning. 6 days of brutal cold, hiking with 40 pounds of gear on my back, photographing bison for a National Geographic shoot. My hands were raw, my knees still sore from the snow. All I wanted was sleep. But Haley looked at me with those eyes, hopeful, a little tired, and said, "Just a couple hours. It's Mom's birthday." So, I showered, shaved, and forced myself into clean clothes. Their house was the same as always, big, polished, and pretending to be warm. Diane greeted me with a hug that didn't reach her eyes. Gerald gave me a 1-second glance over the rim of his Scotch glass. Haley disappeared into the kitchen to help. I was left alone with my own thoughts in the buzz of small talk and forced laughter. Dinner was tense but routine. Gerald talked about some merger deal, Diane fussed over the silverware, Owen and Vanessa nodded through it all. I stayed quiet, answering questions when asked, sipping a beer and eyeing the clock. Then Diane stood and said, "Time for sangria. Made it special tonight." She walked into the kitchen, and something pulled me up from my chair. I offered to help. "You've done enough," I said. She looked startled when I stepped in. 2 glasses sat apart from the others, not yet served. I watched her as she turned quickly and added something clear, subtle, into one of the glasses. Little vial disappeared into her sweater pocket. "Oh, Julian, I've got it," she said, too bright. "This one's for you." I stared at the glass. There was something in it, barely visible, catching the overhead light like oil on water. "Let me carry them," I said, and I picked up both glasses. I brought them into the dining room. Gerald barely looked up when I placed the special glass in front of him. I sat down, raised my water instead, and said nothing. 45 minutes later, Gerald was sweating, pale, and stumbling down the hallway. The sounds coming from the bathroom were undeniable. I looked across the table. Diane's face was frozen. Her eyes met mine. And in that moment, in the silence, we both knew exactly what had happened. The next morning, I wrapped the untouched glass in 2 layers of Ziploc, tucked it inside a hard case I normally used for camera lenses, and drove it across town to someone I trusted. Jason ran a private toxicology lab, small, discreet, forensic. We'd worked together once on a documentary about water contamination, and he owed me a favor. "Personal or professional?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Family," I said. "Off the record." He didn't press. just nodded and took the sample. 3 days later, he called. "Julian, there were benzodiazepines in that drink. Not lethal, but definitely deliberate. Enough to knock someone out, maybe cause confusion, memory issues. Where'd this come from?" I didn't answer. Just thanked him and asked for a report in writing. That night, I didn't mention it to Haley. She was curled up on the couch, exhausted from work, laughing at a video on her phone. I watched her for a long moment and realized I couldn't dump this into her world. Not yet. Not without being sure. So I started looking deeper. Diane had a prescription history that read like a pharmacy directory. Xanax, Valium, Ativan, from 3 different doctors, none of whom seemed aware of the others. I found whispers online. Neighborhood gossip about her erratic behavior at a charity event. A story from a country club blog buried in the comments. Diane Mercer had once been quietly banned from a wine tasting after allegedly taking another guest's bracelet. A week later, I tracked down one of the catering staff from that same event. Oh yeah, he remembered. The tall blonde who kept slurring and knocking over glassware. Took a cab home, didn't seem drunk, more off. The puzzle pieces weren't just aligning, they were snapping into place. This wasn't just a single bad night or a misstep in judgment. This was a pattern, a slow-burning fuse she thought no one had noticed. And now I was holding the matchbook, but I didn't lash out, didn't explode. What I felt was cold, focused, controlled. I didn't want revenge the way she'd done it, laced in sweetness, masked in smiles. No, I wanted truth. Unavoidable, undeniable truth. And I was going to deliver it the only way I knew how. Frame by frame, story by story, until she saw herself through my lens. Diane opened the door with a practiced smile. Perfectly styled hair, tailored blouse, and just the right shade of lipstick. Curated elegance. "Julian," she said, like we were old friends. "Thank you for coming. Gerald's at the office, so we'll have quiet." I nodded and stepped in, camera bag on one shoulder, a sealed manila envelope tucked under my arm. "I thought we could shoot near the garden," she chirped. "The light's wonderful in the morning." "Before we start," I said, voice steady, "there's something you should see." I placed the envelope on the kitchen island, slid it toward her with the same care I might handle a fragile lens. Her fingers hesitated before opening it. Inside, the toxicology report. Photocopies of her overlapping prescriptions. The notes from Jason's lab. The color drained from her face. "This is absurd," she whispered, eyes flicking up to meet mine. "I would never." "We both know what you did," I said. No anger, no raised voice. Just fact. You tried to make me sick, and you succeeded, just not with the right man. Diane's shoulders tensed, the mask slipping. "It wasn't supposed to go that far," she snapped. "It was just something mild. I wanted you to miss the gallery event, that's all." "To prove a point? To show Haley who you really are," she hissed. "Unreliable, irresponsible, someone who doesn't belong in her life." I let the silence stretch between us, cool and sharp. Then I said, "You're going to tell Gerald. Everything. And from now on, you treat me with respect. Not because you believe I've earned it, but because you understand the cost of not doing so." Diane scoffed, brittle and defensive. "She'll never believe you over her family." "Maybe," I said, "but she'll believe the lab report, the pharmacy records, the patterns, and if she doesn't, that's her choice. But I'm giving." "You one right now?" Diane's hands were trembling as she folded the envelope shut. "You think you're clever," she said. "I think I'm done playing your game," I replied. I picked up my camera bag and turned for the door. "No photos today, but thanks for the invitation." Behind me, I heard the envelope hit the countertop with a dull, defeated thud. Haley came home with her arms crossed, jaw tight. The way she didn't kiss me, didn't even look me in the... "You told me everything. She said you threatened her," she said flatly, still standing by the door. "That you barged in, shouted, and made her feel unsafe." I didn't react, just walked to the drawer, pulled out the envelope. the same one Diane had held, read, and trembled over. I didn't threaten her, I said. I confronted her. Quietly. With this. I handed it to Haley. She hesitated, fingers brushing the sealed edge like it might burn. Then she opened it. Silence stretched between us as she read. I stood still, watching the shadows from the kitchen light move across. Her face, Her voice cracked. This can't be right. It is, I said softly. Lab verified. Your mom's prescriptions line up. I found others willing to talk about her behavior, Haley. This wasn't some misunderstanding. She closed the file, held it like something sacred and cursed. My mom, she's not perfect, but she wouldn't. I stepped closer, but gently. She would. She did. Haley's eyes brimmed with tears. You don't know what it's like to grow up with them. I've spent my whole life translating their judgment into concern, trying to earn their approval, to keep the peace. I nodded. And I've spent years pretending their insults didn't land, letting them talk to me like I was some teenage mistake you hadn't outgrown. She turned away, voice a whisper now. I need time. And with that, she walked upstairs. That night, we didn't talk. The silence wasn't angry. It was hollow. A space too wide to cross with words alone. The days that followed were quieter still. She'd leave early, return late, eyes red. I didn't ask where she went. I didn't press. We became strangers in shared rooms, eating meals on opposite ends of the table, pretending to sleep beside each other like actors playing a married couple. She wasn't the enemy. Neither was I. But her parents? They'd thrown a bomb into the middle of our life and watched from the safety of their fortress. And now, I didn't know if we'd survive the fallout or become part of the debris. The envelope was unmarked, no return address, just my name, scrawled in pen across the front. Inside, a small USB drive and a sticky note in sharp, blocky handwriting. You should see this. Vanessa. I stared at it for a long time. Vanessa and I weren't exactly close. Friendly at dinners, sure, but always at the periphery of each other's lives. Polite hellos, shared glances when Gerald launched into another monologue about capital markets. But this wasn't small talk. I plugged it into my laptop. The first video was security footage. Their kitchen. Timestamp. The night of the dinner. Diane stood at the counter holding 2 wine glasses. I watched, stunned, as she took a small vial from her pocket, poured its contents into one glass, swirled it twice, and then looked up, startled by a sound behind her. There I was, walking into frame. She smiled. Too big. Too fake. This one's for you, I could hear faintly. The next clip showed me swapping glasses with Gerald in the dining room. Then him drinking. Then the bathroom door slamming shut as sounds of sickness echoed down the hall. But it was what came. After that froze me. Diane and Gerald alone in the kitchen again. Diane pacing, agitated. You were supposed to let him drink it, she hissed. Now everything's ruined. Gerald rubbing his temples. This isn't the first time, Diane. This has to stop. What if someone finds out? She snapped back. He won't. And Haley would never believe him. She'll always believe us. The next clip, dated 2 days later, was worse. Same kitchen, different storm. He knows, Gerald said flatly. He knows what you did. So what? Diane's voice was icy. It's his word against ours. And I've already started planting seeds about the marriage, about his jealousy. By the time I'm done, Haley will be filing for divorce and thanking me for saving her. I paused the video. The room felt still. My skin, ice. It hadn't just been about me. They'd been doing this for years, manipulating, gaslighting, severing every connection in Haley's life that didn't fit their mold. And now, finally, I had proof. Not just of a crime, but of a legacy. A legacy I intended to end. The night after I watched the footage, I didn't sleep. My mind turned slowly, deliberately, like gears grinding through thick molasses. I'd seen enough to justify cutting them out forever. But that wasn't the point anymore. This wasn't just about me. It was about Haley. It was about all the quiet ways they'd broken her without her ever realizing it. The next morning I made a list. Names, places, time periods. First I called Bethany, Haley's college roommate. She didn't hesitate. "Thomas?" she said when I asked. Oh God, that was awful. She told me how Haley was in love with him, a kind, quiet orthopedic resident. But then her parents got involved. Her mom claimed he cheated. Her dad said he lied about his family's wealth. Haley believed them. By the time Thomas tried to explain, she wouldn't answer his calls. I tracked him down. Thomas. He was hesitant at first, understandably. But when I told him what was happening now, he sent everything. Emails, messages, a voicemail of him, begging her to hear his side. It was like a mirror of what I'd been living through. Then I contacted a few of Haley's old friends, women she was close with in her 20s. One by one, they admitted they'd drifted away. Not because of a fight, but because they always felt pushed out. "Your in-laws didn't like me," one woman told me. "They made it known." The story formed itself, a pattern of control, emotional sabotage disguised as parental concern, and now a failed attempt at something even darker. I compiled everything, labeled it, organized it in a folder called For Haley. That weekend I invited Owen and Vanessa for dinner. Haley didn't know what was coming, but she saw it in my eyes. After dessert, I connected my laptop to the TV. "I need you both to watch this." They did. Every clip, every photo, every forwarded email, Gerald's voice, Diane's plans. Haley sat frozen. Owen whispered no under his breath again and again. When it was done, the silence was unbearable. Then Haley whispered, "They've been doing this to me my whole life." Her voice cracked, and so did the illusion they'd wrapped around. Her something shattered that night, and something else finally began to heal. We arrived at their house just after dusk. Haley and I, Owen and Vanessa. I carried my camera bag like always, but this time it wasn't to photograph landscapes or wildlife. It was to frame the truth. Diane answered the door with her usual performance, too sweet, too eager, too tight around the eyes. Gerald hovered behind her, trying to appear casual, hands in pockets like this was just another family evening. But when I set up the tripod and locked in the lens, something shifted. "What is this?" Diane asked, her smile thinning. "Family. Documentation," I said quietly, leveling the camera at the center of the room. "For the record." "We don't agree to be filmed," Gerald snapped. I met his eyes. "You don't have to. It's legal in this state, and honestly, I think you'll want a record of what's about to be said." I pulled out the USB drive and plugged it into the TV. The screen lit up with footage. The dinner, the drink, her hands, her voice, Gerald drinking what was meant for me. Then, the confrontation after. Her blame, his explosion, her confession that it wasn't the first time. Owen stood, frozen. Haley sat hunched forward like her body was waiting to flee, but her heart was still tethered. "This is doctored," Gerald muttered. "It has to be." I played the second clip, Diane talking about ruining our marriage. Gerald smirking as she promised to convince Haley to file for divorce, and believe it was her own idea. "I never said that," Diane whispered, pale. "That's not me. That's not—" "It's all of you," I said quietly. The final blow was a string of emails from years ago. Messages meant to break Haley's confidence in old friends, in past relationships, planting seeds, slicing her world down until only they remained. Haley stood slowly. "I love you," she said to her parents. "But you don't love me, you love control, and I'm done." Diane collapsed into the couch, shaking her head. Gerald stood motionless. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked small. Owen walked over and put a hand on Haley's shoulder. "We're with you," he said, "all the way." And that was it. No screaming, no violence, just silence, heavy and final, and a red blinking light still recording. It was Gerald who extended the olive branch, a neatly embossed card in the mail, followed by a stiff text. "Family dinner, fresh start." Haley wanted to go. "They're trying," she said, rubbing my arm as we lay in bed. "Maybe it's progress." Maybe. Or maybe it was just another test disguised as grace. We arrived at their house, the same old house with its pristine flower beds and ice-cold welcome. But this time, the smiles were wider, more practiced. Gerald poured wine. Diane commented on my recent gallery showing, pretending it wasn't the first time she'd ever acknowledged my career without a backhanded compliment attached. After dessert, Gerald invited me into his study. I hesitated, but followed. The room smelled like old leather and money. He poured 2 glasses of scotch and gestured toward the seat across from him. "I've been thinking," he started, swirling the glass. "You're good with people, smart, steady. Photography's and fine. But have you ever considered something more stable? I could bring you on. Junior partner track, substantial salary. It's a real future." I stared at him, then at the glass in my hand. The offer wasn't about generosity. It was about rewriting the narrative, him offering me legitimacy on his terms, and ownership once again over Haley's world. I placed the glass down, untouched. "Thank you," I said evenly. "But I already have a future." His smile thinned. "Don't be foolish, Julian. This is an olive branch. Don't let pride cost you everything." "I'm not letting pride guide me," I replied. "Just clarity. You still think this is about winning. It's not." Just then, Haley appeared at the door. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Perfect," I said, standing. She glanced between us, then took my hand. "There's something we want to tell you." Back in the dining room, Owen and Vanessa looked up. Diane emerged from the kitchen, still pretending to be the doting host. Haley didn't sit. She looked her parents in the eye and said, "We're having a baby." Silence. Diane's face froze. Gerald blinked, and in that moment, without shouting threats or documents, they understood. They had lost the one thing they'd clung to the longest: control. 3 weeks after the dinner, a certified envelope arrived. No letter, no pleasantries, just legal documents, the deed to the house we'd been renting and paperwork establishing a trust fund for our unborn daughter. Clean, irrevocable. It wasn't an apology. Gerald didn't believe in those. It was something else. A final transaction, a quiet admission that they'd lost. That control no longer belonged to them. We accepted the house, not out of gratitude, but because it was ours already in spirit. We'd built our lives inside those walls. I hung framed prints of mountain skylines and fog-drenched forests in the hallway. Haley painted the nursery in soft ocean blues. The baby kicked to the sound of distant rainstorms and the hum of photo editing late at night. We named her Eliza, after my grandmother, the only person who ever told me that art could be legacy. When Gerald and Diane came to the hospital, they were careful, not distant but measured. They brought gifts, posed for polite photos, and offered no parenting advice. For the first time, they didn't try to shape the moment. They simply existed inside it. Months passed. We visited occasionally. Short, deliberate visits, always with clear boundaries. No uninvited stays. No unsolicited input. Haley seemed lighter. Not because she forgave them, but because she no longer sought their approval. She had seen who they truly were. And somehow she loved herself more because of it. That spring, I opened my own gallery downtown. It wasn't flashy, just brick and glass and honesty. The photos on the wall were mine, all mine. Moments captured from years of climbing ridges, waiting in snow, crouching behind hedges for hours. Each image told a story no one could erase. At the opening, my parents flew in from Oregon. Haley held Eliza on her hip, beaming. Friends laughed over wine. Clients browsed the prints. And near the end of the night, Gerald and Diane walked through the door. They didn't stay long. Diane held Eliza briefly. Gerald shook my hand, looked at the photos, nodded, and left. No advice, no criticism. As we locked up the gallery that night, Haley turned to me. "Do you think they've changed?" I thought for a long time. "No," I said. "But they've accepted that they can't change us." And that, I realized, was the real victory. Not their defeat, but our freedom.